How's it going, everybody? This is the Music Production Podcast, and I am your host, Brian Funk. I make music as AfroDJMac. You can check out my work at AfroDJMac.com. And I thank you for listening to the show. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with a friend. Let people know about it. Give it a review on iTunes. Spread the word a little bit. That would be greatly appreciated. So today, I want to talk about something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately for the last few months. And I've sort of solidified an answer to it, but I know that this stuff changes from day to day with me. So, in a month or two, I might say something completely different. But I've been thinking about, as a teacher, what the most important lesson is. So, with your classes, sometimes you get a lot of time with students, and it's easy to pick a lot of different things to cover and a lot of topics to discuss. And sometimes I find in the search for all of these specific lessons and teachings that it can be easy to lose sight of the big picture. So, really starting over the summertime, I've been thinking, and what is the most important lesson? Like, if I had one day, one lesson to give my students, and this is really not just music production, this is any kind of student, what would that lesson be? What's the most important thing I would want people to leave with? And it kind of came down to this realization that I want to leave students feeling empowered and capable. And how do I do that? So I came up with the idea of saying that my most important lesson is that all big things, all big accomplishments and achievements are not really just one event that happens. It's not this, it might seem like that on the outside where one big thing comes. Maybe it's a big song, a release, or an award or a trophy or something. But those big things are really just a collection of lots and lots of little things added up over time. So the big lesson would be that all major accomplishments are really a series of little things put together. And I think that's an important lesson because it's easy to forget. It's easy to get focused on the results. It's easy to get lost in, major achievements. You do something and you are looking for a result, whether you get it or not, can make a big difference. But if you have this idea in your mind that it's really just lots of little things and that the big things will come in time, I think that's empowering and can help you move forward even when maybe you might not be seeing results on a day-to-day basis, but knowing that every single step you are taking is getting you forward and moving you towards whatever goals you may have. And to sort of illustrate that, I'm going to break off into some side topics that I think all connect to this. But I've got a few resources that I'm going to put show notes on my website, afrodjmac.com/podcast, for this post that I think will be helpful. I think you should check out and watch and read about. But it brings me to the first topic, which is discipline, really. And discipline is just making something. I see discipline as, I guess, doing something no matter what, making it a habit, forcing yourself to do things even when you don't want to. And one quote that I've printed it out, I actually made a poster in my high school classroom, is focus on I might mess up the quote, but it was focus on discipline, not inspiration. And that's from Jocko Willink, Navy SEAL, who's right now just released a book called Extreme Ownership. And he, I think, is a really, I'm sorry, the book is not called Extreme Ownership. That's the old book. The new book, and I highly recommend that one too, but the new book is called Discipline Equals Freedom. It's a field manual, which I have not read yet, but I've heard a lot about and excited to get my hands on. But this idea, the quote is that, I think a lot of times we wait to be inspired. We wait until we get that feeling and that kind of rush of excitement that makes us want to do something. And that is not always going to be there. So if we wait for inspiration and motivation, we are going to probably come up short a lot of the times. I mean, you can probably think of a million excuses not to do something, and some of them might even seem productive. But we need to rely on discipline. And it kind of ties in a bit to another person that I really admire his work and I've spoken about before, which is Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art. And it's about showing up again and again and again every single day. So, Stephen Pressfield, who's also really talking a lot about discipline in his work too, he goes over the difference between amateurs and pros. And the amateur waits for inspiration, the amateur waits until everything's right. But the pro gets to work no matter what every single day and just focuses on the work and focuses on the process and the pushing through and just getting things done. And what I really like about this attitude is that it's just encouraging you to do the work to get, which is the title of another one of his book, Do the Work. But it's just telling you to start and go and get moving and to just produce, produce, produce. Go through the process all the time. And that to me is like this big lesson that the little things are just, I'm sorry, the big things are just lots of little things. So the pro, for instance, won't focus on the outcome of the work. So you're not really worrying about if things are a failure or success. And you're not taking that to heart. You're not taking it personally. You're not letting yourself, as say an artist, musician, producer, you're not letting that work define you. It's just one thing you've put out. And I do remember reading an interview with Paul McCartney in which it was like Guitar World. I feel like I may have mentioned this before, but it just struck me, where the Guitar World, or whoever it was, the interviewer was asking Paul McCartney how he was able to, say, write a song like Eleanor Rigby, which is an amazing classic, and so many others. And then on the other hand, write some other song, which I don't even remember which song it was, that it wasn't considered as good. So I guess like a throwaway, one of his less popular songs that wasn't a hit and maybe might be considered not some of his best work. And Paul McCartney responded with like, look, nobody at any field is always putting out work at their best. Something like, say, an Eleanor Rigby. That comes along once in a while. Your best work comes along occasionally. But the point was that you have to just keep working and you have to put out some and go through maybe some work that's not as good as your best just to get to the next thing that is, your next masterpiece or whatever it might be. It's just trudging through, and it reflects this idea of discipline and, being a professional, that you just have to keep going at it. And you will at times come up with, less than pleasing results. But that's not the point. The point is the practice. And this is something, I've really learned a lot from studying a little bit of yoga, where it's not about how flexible you are or if you can touch your toes or whatever challenge it is. You watch like people, I hear people say things like, I'm not good at yoga. And that there's kind of no such thing. It's the practice. It's the act of doing it. It doesn't matter where you are, but it's the fact that you're just doing it. You're going through it. I think that ties into things like meditation too. It's not so much whether you're good at it or not. It's that you're doing it, that you're taking the time, that you're evaluating, that you're assessing, that you're going through the process. And on certain days, you may be able to do one thing that you can't do the next day for whatever reason. Your body changes, but to become aware of that, understand it is really the important thing, to become present. And I think when we focus on our process, on our practice, that's when things get done. I know it's true for me. It's sitting down and getting going. And a lot of the projects I work on at first seem incredibly daunting. And I mean, this podcast itself was. What's the most important lesson? To even talk about that felt like a major task to come up with. That has to be really important to talk about. And it wasn't really until I started like writing it down, the things I wanted to say, that I started to move. And it was a small step. I just decided earlier today, really, to start jotting down the ideas I wanted to talk about here. And that led me to a couple Google searches. I watched a few videos, which I'm going to share in the show notes, that kind of got me going. And now I'm recording this podcast. So the work is getting done. And I've been putting this one off for a little while now. I said I've been thinking about this since the summer. It took a little time to gather the thoughts, but it really took the getting to work, literally putting the pen to paper for me. And whether or not this comes out as one of the better episodes is to be determined, but I need to get through it and I need to do it because that's the practice. So focusing on the process is super, super important. And that will strengthen your process so that when you actually do have something that you're proud of and that you're excited about, you know how to get through it. I talk about that a lot too with my students and people and other musicians I'm trying to learn from. Um, so the conditions are never just right. Conditions are never perfect. The thing is, you just got to start, take those little steps. And even if you're only capable of doing just a little bit, to think of that as an accomplishment, that you are slowly but surely stacking those bricks that will eventually become that skyscraper one at a time. And that's the real lesson here. Um, I wanted to kind of talk about a little situation that happened to me just the other day with a student who is learning how to use Ableton Live and Push in one of my extra help sessions that I do. And he said he's not good at it. I'm not good at this. So I sat down with him, and he's a young kid, and he's about the age I was when I started playing guitar. And I asked him if, first we were just doing beats on the push, and I asked him if he understood like musical bars and subdivisions of notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, and he didn't. And I quickly kind of related to that because when I started guitar, I had no idea of this stuff. So I started explaining the basics to him and just that how everything is broken up musically, and that it's okay to be where you are. You're just not there yet. And it changed him a lot because I saw him kind of fading and maybe losing interest because he didn't have the next step. So I was able to just give him that next little boost and explain to him too that like this does take time. But think of how much further you are along now than you were in the beginning when you first started. And I think it helped him. He was getting back to work afterwards, but it was just another example of we're taking little steps. And I said this word just a second ago, yet, Y-E-T, yet. And this comes from Carol Dweck, who speaks about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And I've got a video I'm going to share with you on the show notes that I think really explains this nicely. But the difference between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset is super important in how we learn. So we have a fixed mindset, which is that type of thinking that says like, you're good at math, you're not good at English, you're good at art, you're not good at science, you're not a very physical person. These are like when we decide that this is just our like natural predisposition. These are our natural talents. Those are our fixed mindsets. And we get this in our head like, oh, I'm just never good at, numbers, let's say. I'm never good at math. That's just something I'm never good at. And we decide somewhere along the way that that's just where we are in that subject area. And the problem with this sort of thinking is that it makes trying new things very difficult because, of course, you're not going to be good at a new thing when you first start it. Of course, you're going to be a beginner. You might be terrible at it. But if you have the fixed mindset, you might, after just minimal effort, decide that that is too much for you and you're not capable of doing that. That's the dangers of the fixed mindset. The growth mindset, though, uses this word yet, where you would say, I'm not good at math yet. I'm not good at music yet. I'm not good at whatever yet. I'm not good at mixing my tracks yet. And the yet implies that like soon you will be. And the growth mindset approaches things with the thinking that you can become that, you can grow, you can change. So you're not stuck at whatever ability you started out with. You're able to grow and change and develop. And the studies have shown, according to Carol Dweck, and I think when you just kind of think about it, common sense too, but the studies show that people that have the growth mindset are much more likely to accept challenges. They're much more likely to not waver in failure or defeat. they're much more likely to pick themselves off the ground, where the fixed mindset people will say, I'm just not good at that. I'm not meant to be doing this. I'm fixed at this particular ability. I'm stuck here. And the growth mindset people are much more likely to develop and grow and power through the challenges. They're, they welcome challenges. They see them as an opportunity to grow, to change. And it's at the point of challenges where your growth happens in life with anything. The point where you challenge yourself. If everything's easy for you, you're never going to really improve at it. You're never going to get better. And I like to think of the analogy of working out. So exercising, lifting weights, let's say. If you are trying to bench press, for instance, we'll just say where you are laying on your back and pressing the bar directly up from your chest, if you're doing 5 pounds, which would be easy for most people, 5 pounds is going to be super easy. It's not going to challenge you. And you can do that all day long, every single day, and you're not going to see any growth. But with working out, the growth happens at those challenging points, and especially at the last few reps, say in a workout. So you're working out really hard and maybe the last ones where you're really struggling to lift that bar, that's when the change happens, when you're at those edges of your ability. Now, growth mindset people are more likely to push through those challenges and spend time working at the edges of their ability. They might fail, they might not do it. Eventually you're not going to be able to lift that bar anymore, but you'll keep going, you'll keep trying. And the fixed mindset people would not really like to be at that particular area where you're struggling and you're facing your challenges and you're at your edges of your ability. That's uncomfortable for them. But if we can train ourselves to think that we can be comfortable in the discomfort, we'll see a lot of growth. So think about how you're thinking about your work. Are you in that like fixed mindset where I'm just not good at this? You might say, I'm just not good at EQing my tracks. Well, if you decide that, you're probably never going to really try and push yourself to get better. But if you decide like I'm not good at EQing my tracks yet, now there's that implication that you will someday be good at it. So I think it's really important to think about how you think. So, what are the things you're telling yourself in your head? It's really easy to sort of, I guess, like tune out that mental voice we all have that's kind of talking to us all day. Because if you're anything like me, you're probably having this internal dialogue 24 hours a day, except I guess when you're asleep. But maybe you can even argue that like you're dreaming and your sleep quality might be reflective of what's actually going on in your head. But we're having this internal dialogue all the time. And I find it interesting how little amount of energy we spend thinking about the way we think. So our patterns of thoughts. And that can actually be our, downfall, because our patterns of thinking start to become our beliefs. And those beliefs start to become our reality. So if you're not thinking in a positive way, say this fixed mindset, you start to believe that you're not good at that. And then in reality, it becomes true because you don't work at it and you're not good at it. You're not making those little steps to get further and further ahead. And I think we all live in our own little version of reality. If we kind of imagine the way we all perceive the world, and we're all taking in different stimulus and having different experiences, and for each one of those experiences and stimulus we are processing it differently and interpreting it differently. I think over time that all adds up to paint a wildly different reality from maybe the person with a different mindset. So I think we need to pay attention to how we think, and obviously a great tool for that is meditation, in which we just kind of pay attention to our thoughts and just let them happen, let them come, let them go, and just notice them, take note of them, and see if we can recognize those patterns. And maybe some of those patterns are destructive. So when we're thinking of big projects, it's these little things that add together and become something bigger. And I think we get stuck, and Carol Dweck, I think is how we say it. Carol Dweck talks about the tyranny of now, which is something that would affect the fixed mindset person, in which you're stuck under the rule of now, your abilities now, what you are now. But eventually now becomes later and later becomes now. And if we keep pushing and pushing, later on, now will be different and we'll be at a different ability. But again, if we're not willing to just take those little steps, we don't get there. I guess that what I'm really trying to say is that it's just showing up, it's just doing the work, it's just putting it in. And it's also not really getting upset about the outcomes of your work, but understanding that just doing the work is in and of itself an accomplishment. It's a little thing. And sometimes the little things don't look like much, but over time, they grow into the bigger things. So I might suggest, for instance, focusing on quantity with your work. Let's not even think about quality too much. Let's focus on quantity. Let's just try to produce as much as we can to show up every day and come up with something, make some progress, some little bit every single day. And we're not going to worry as much about the quality because I think as we go through the practice of putting out a large quantity of work, it will inevitably improve just through experience. If we believe that the more you do something, the better you get at it, then that would make sense that if we produce more work, the work will soon become better. And we can also pay attention to, like, learning and teaching specific things. We can devote time towards those tasks. We can consider that one of the little things if it's taking some lessons or courses or watching some videos or reading some articles or books. Those are still steps in the right direction. I think it's important not to get caught up in the learning phase, but to really make sure we transfer ourselves to the producing phase, the actually doing the work phase too. But all of that stuff is a little piece in the big picture. I think at this point, that is the most important thing I would want a student to know and to emphasize. And I know for myself, like, even being aware of this, it's still an abstract thought, especially in the moment when you're working and you're not seeing the big things happen. It's very abstract to think that, like, we're working on something bigger that we don't really have any way of recognizing yet. But I find it comforting to remind myself of that. And I am sitting here saying it to you, but it's not like it's always the case. Sometimes I'm not thinking about that. I think having a reminder of that is important. For me, a good tool is journaling and this podcast too, and just documenting my work, even if it's on my blog. I spent a lot of time recently going over my website, trying to make it a little more usable. I found myself one night kind of browsing my website as a user and less as like the guy that makes the website. And I suddenly said, like, oh my God, like, it's kind of hard to find stuff on here. So I spent a lot of time going back and building and trying to change things around, and was able to make it much more usable. But I think that we need to remind ourselves sometimes that all of this stuff is part of the process. And I need that reminder as much as anyone else. So if we can find ways to remind ourselves, maybe some of these videos will help you. Maybe it's hanging a quote up somewhere. But just remember that those little things are going to eventually make the big things. And it's an important thing to remember, especially when things get tough and when we're not seeing results. I think that is one of the most important things we can remember because it translates to almost everything we do in life. And most things in life do have these sort of lulls and plateaus where we're not seeing the growth exactly, but we need to be reminded that we are making progress. And when we're talking about something like being an artist or a producer, you're not always getting, gold records in the mail every day. So you're not getting the praise all the time. But it's understanding that by just showing up and just doing it, you are getting closer to those things. You are making yourself more of that person you want to be, that producer. And I think, like I said, it applies to everything. If we're talking about working out again, don't expect to go to the gym for 45 minutes one day and walk out with like six-pack abs. Like that takes a long time and a lot of dedication. But at the same time, it's still little steps. It's deciding for each meal what you're going to eat and just making that decision each time, showing up every single time will help you get there. Well, I hope that helps a little bit. It was important for me to stress and get off my chest because it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm questioning a lot of my methods as a teacher and the big messages I want to get across, and trying not to get lost in the details so much. And to me, this is probably the most important thing I can think of, that the little things eventually become the big things. And you got to just keep plugging away, keep chipping away, and keep working at it. And know that every time you show up, you are moving forward. Whether or not the results are tangible and you can hold them in your hands, you're still making progress. So keep that in mind. And stop listening to me talk and start getting to work now. So thanks for listening. This is the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. Making music as AfroDJMac. Please check out my work at AfroDJMac.com. Leave your reviews of the show and let people know about it. Spread the word and let me know what you think. Share your thoughts. I would love to know what your most important lesson would be. Maybe you can send me a tweet or a message somewhere. Leave a comment on the blog post itself. But let me know, what is the most important lesson to you? I'd love to get a collection and maybe publish something someday. Share these all on a post or another episode of the podcast in which we have a bunch of different most important lessons gathered together from the community. Thanks very much for listening and have a great day.